The lightning rod is one of those semi-commonplace things you've probably seen or heard of before, but also probably didn't pay much attention to and just accept it as a thing that exists and nothing more and nothing less. Although, oddly enough, you might be more likely to have seen it than to have heard of it. For example, upon first glance, you might not know what this picture is of, but it certainly goes hard as fuck. The lightning rod was invented by this guy, Benjamin Franklin, in order to study lightning and prove that lightning and electricity were the same thing in essence, and that lightning was an electrical phenomenon. Many, including him, had already suggested this, and it was just a matter of proving it. The first lightning rod is believed to have looked like this, but it wasn't designed until after Franklin, supposedly, more on this later, did a thing that's now commonly referred to as the kite experiment. The alleged experiment was allegedly performed 2 years, June 1752, after Franklin came up with the idea for the lightning rod. According to the Franklin Institute, he had initially planned to wait for the steeple atop Christ Church to finish being built, but he got impatient. He just like me for real. So what this guy said was, fine, I'll do it myself, and proceeded to make a kite that probably looked like this. Important parts to note here are the key and the iron point on top. The iron point on top of the kite was used to attract electricity from the sky, and it was connected to the metal key with a hemp string, which oddly enough isn't shown on the diagram. The key is what Franklin chose to use to divert an electrical charge into a Leyden jar, a gizmo that I'll explain the use of later in a second. Here is another more detailed diagram of the kite. Anyways, what this mad lad does is he goes outside and hides in the doorway of a shed so he doesn't get shocked with his kite, which is connected to this thing called a Leyden jar that I mentioned earlier. A Leyden jar is essentially the caveman's capacitor. It's a glass jar that stores high voltage electricity from an outside source using a conductor on the inside with the intention of later use. If I had time, I'd probably explain more, but that's not the main subject, so that's all you really need to know. So bro's posted up in the shed with his son, along with his aforementioned cool jar and his cool kite. Benjamin's son helps him get his kite into the air, and then they wait a bit. According to this article that I'm already heavily referencing from the Franklin Institute, just as he was beginning to despair, Franklin noticed loose threads of the hemp string used to conduct electricity in juxtaposition to a silk string used as an insulator standing erect, just as if they had been suspended on a common conductor. So, long story short, they allegedly collected electricity from the sky. What's next? Well, according to the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, quote, with the proof that lightning was indeed electricity, and knowing that an iron rod could be used to attract it, Franklin erected the first lightning rod on top of the roof of his own house to continue tests. It worked. To paraphrase Franklin's words from a directly related passage in the Experiments and Observations on Electricity, if you place a big iron stick firmly into the ground, on or outside a building, from its highest point, making sure the stick is connected to the ground, the lightning will zap the stick and then go into the earth. I will now read the passage published in Poor Richard's Almanac by Benjamin Franklin on this issue in a nerd accent. Please enjoy.
It has pleased God in his goodness to mankind at length to discover to them the means of securing their habitations and other buildings from mischief by thunder and lightning. The method is this. Provide a small iron rod. It may be made of the rod iron used by the nailers, but of such a length that one end being 3 or 4 feet in the moist ground, the other may be 6 or 8 feet above the highest part of the building. To the upper end of the rod, fasten about a foot of brass wire, the size of a common knitting needle, sharpened to a fine point. The rod may be secured to the house with a few small staples. If the house or barn be long, there may be a rod and point at each end and a middling wire along the ridge from one to the other. A house thus furnished will not be damaged by lightning, it being attracted to the points and passing through the metal into the ground without hurting anything. Vessels also having a sharp pointed rod fixed on top of their masts with a wire from the foot of the rod reaching down round one of the shrouds to the water will not be hurt by lightning.
Something I promised to explain earlier is that one of the reasons that no one knows
with 100%, with 1,000%
certainty that the kite experiment actually happened was because Franklin only brought his son with him, and the other reason, according to history.com, is because, quote, everything we know about Franklin's kite and key experiment comes from 2 sources. The first is a letter Franklin wrote to his friend Peter Collinson in October 1752 that was published in the Pennsylvania Gazette and read before the Royal Society. The second is a section of Joseph Priestley's 1767 book, History and the Present Status of Electricity, in which Priestley recounted what Franklin had presumably told him about the experiment. So the experiment is generally accepted to have taken place, but as many things that happened a long time ago are, unverifiable as certain. Doesn't help that it was really poorly documented, and it's a miracle that we were able to pick up the pieces. The lightning rod is one of Franklin's better documented endeavors, if not the best, which is why I decided to do a project on the lightning rod as opposed to some of his other endeavors like the bifocals or the Franklin stove. Also, before the main subject of the video continues, I would like to mention a couple of things. Despite popular belief, Franklin's kite was not struck by lightning. It instead slowly collected a passive ambient atmospheric electric charge to be stored in a Leyden jar. Benjamin Franklin also did not discover or invent electricity in the same way that Newton didn't invent or, disputedly, even discover gravity. To quote history.com, electricity was already a known phenomenon during the mid-18th century. There were, however, debates about the nature of this phenomenon, and Franklin was one of a group of philosophers and scientists who theorized that lightning was a form of electricity. End quote. Back to the main topic. Psych! Before I continue, I would like to point out that these images, some of which you'll almost undoubtedly come across while researching the kite experiment, are all completely historically inaccurate, although they do provide a decent, general, broad, direct, and overarching depiction of what took place during the experiment. The experiment most likely looked more like this, but people like to dramatize stuff. Perhaps most of these depictions featured Franklin's kite getting struck by lightning, and this is my own speculative opinion, because it would look more epic, or at least detail what's happening more clearly, and thus I don't blame them as much. This, however, did not happen. If it did, he most likely would have died. There's this tower in Russia called the Nevyansk Tower that has a metallic spire on top. Many believe that this spire is an intentionally implemented piece of hardware that functions in the same way as the lightning rod does. The thing is, this tower was erected between 1721 and 1745. At the very latest, this tower was fully built 7 years before Ben's kite experiment and 5 years before the idea of the lightning rod is even believed to have been conceived. At the earliest, these two numbers respectively increased to 31 and 29. The reason I brought this up isn't just to transition into modern applications of the lightning rod. It's also because I find it kind of peculiar that Franklin might not have been the first person to have this sort of idea. Of course, the inventor's motives and ideas behind the spire aren't something we can access. Ever. Moving to post-kite experiment lightning rod applications, this Czech scientist/priest named Prokop Divish, or whatever these letters make up, also had the brilliant idea of, essentially, sticking a giant metal rod into the ground in order to protect humanity from God's sneezes. You ever heard the saying, "I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole"? Yeah, well, this one was 49. And then it was 136. Bro really said he wouldn't even touch lightning with a 49 and some change foot pole. He had the idea for this after Georg Wilhelm Richman, a Russian physics professor at St. Petersburg University, passed away after being clipped by a stray lightning bolt. He was struck by lightning. So anyways, he came up with this thing called the meteorological machine, Machina Meteorologica, which was a device that could attract lightning. He built this device to supposedly prevent storms and influence weather, but that part ended up falling short. Not in pop culture though, I guess. So he made a lightning rod, not the lightning rod. He did make the first electronic instrument though. Maybe I'll make a video on that, I don't know. Before moving on to more modern applications of the lightning rod as part of Franklin's legacy, I feel like I'd be doing a disservice to the topic itself without mentioning the improvements Nikola Tesla made to the invention. The first real echo of the modern lightning protection system. On May 14th, 1918, renowned scientist Nikola Tesla introduced a patent for a lightning protector that was based both functionally and conceptually on Franklin's. However, Nikola challenges Benjamin's design by making many major fundamental changes which, according to the former, improved the device's functionality, safety, and design. The new design also adds features to protect from the ionization of surrounding air, which was an unseen issue with Franklin's lightning rod. On top of that, it supposedly prevents strikes from recurring, as Tesla accuses Franklin's needle-shaped rod of actually increasing the probability of lightning strikes. There are debates about this in the present day, but this paragraph accuses the needle rod of increasing the probability of lightning strikes. Anyways, the patent outlines various configurations for these protectors, including ellipsoidal shells, radiating metal bars, and
Cupola.
And cupola-shaped terminals, all intended to provide more effective lightning protection. In the present day, standards of lightning protection have changed a lot. Singular pointed lightning rods are seldom used and are no longer a major symbol of status. Lightning protection has become standard for buildings that need it. In fact, there are literal standards surrounding lightning protection like NFPA 780, UL 96 and 96A, and LPI 175. According to VFC Lightning Protection, quote, at a national level, building lightning protection requirements do not mandate lightning protection systems in the United States, but certain facilities benefit greatly from this increased protection, especially those with large crowds, continuity of critical services, a high lightning flash frequency, tall isolated structures, building containing explosive or flammable materials, and building containing irreplaceable cultural heritage. What's more is that present-day lightning protection systems are way more complicated than just slapping a couple of sticks on top of a building, grounding them, and calling it a day. According to the Lightning Protection Institute, quote, there are 5 elements that need to be in place to provide an effective lightning protection system. Strike termination devices must be suitable to accept direct lightning attachment and pattern to accept strikes before they reach insulated building materials. Cable conductors route lightning over and through the construction without damage between strike terminations at the top and the grounding electrode system at the bottom. The below-grade grounding electrode system must efficiently move the lightning to its final destination away from the building and its contents. Bonding, or the interconnection of the lightning protection system to other internal grounded metal systems, must be accommodated to eliminate the opportunity for lightning to side flash internally. This stuff is understandably pretty complicated, so it's alright if it doesn't immediately make sense. In the simplest terms I can think of, it basically goes like this. Strike termination devices take lightning from the sky. Next, cable connectors move the lightning through the building without damaging it and move it to the grounding electrode system at the bottom. The grounding electrode system moves the lightning away from the building, and then the bonding system makes sure nothing else gets struck. Make sense? Good. These systems are made of copper and aluminum, the former echoing earlier lightning rods that used copper as the conductive metal of choice. Maybe they were onto something. It may seem like I'm going on a tangent here, but a vast majority... I'm going to shoot myself. A vast majority of these improvements, regulations, and standards most likely wouldn't exist, at least for a vastly longer time, without Benjamin Franklin. His experiments surrounding electricity did the walking so modern electrical science could fly, and the kite experiment and lightning rods are integral parts of that, you feel me? You gotta start somewhere, you know what I'm saying? That's not even mentioning how Benjamin Franklin contributed to our understanding of electricity and its nature as a whole. For example, Franklin both discovered and coined the terms for positive and negative charges. He even coined the terms battery and conductor, words that are commonly used when discussing electricity. Benjamin Franklin's kite experiment proved that lightning is, in fact, electricity. His invention of the lightning rod, while now seeming primitive, was also revolutionary, being the first way to protect buildings from lightning strikes. Today, his discoveries are still borrowed from to ensure the safety of buildings, equipment, and people alike. In conclusion, I think Benjamin Franklin was W-mans for inventing the lightning rod, and we should all take a lesson from him in trying to learn more about the stuff we find intriguing. That's it. Thanks for watching. Watch One Piece.